Evet.
Yes. So this is the end of a 2-day conference. If we had to change the title of this conference, and I think after these 2 days, I would say I would not be using this title. I I would talk about the rise of Izmir and collapse of Izmir. So this would be the title. So we talked about the second half of the 19th century. So Izmir was the shining star of the shining star of the Mediterranean. But after that period, uh, that it had experienced a collapse. It became introverted. And listening to this conference gave me a deja vu. So particularly after today's panel, I don't want to discuss all the panels in detail. I will just make a general evaluation. So this is deja vu. 25 years ago, when I was working on the asset tax, wealth tax, I was reading the newspapers of 1942, 1943, and I think in January and February 1943, and just like Ümit Kurt and Talat Bey said, Istanbul Press had advertisements for houses and items on sale, buffets, pianos, mirrors, pictures, paintings. So these were sold. And I really didn't like one advertisement. So there was Tapas highlight. Uh, his shop was confiscated, and 5 kilo of butter was sold in auction. So when I was listening to today's panel, I have remembered the newspapers that I have read back then for that study. And in 1990, when I was working on the population exchange at the end of 1990s, I was reading the recording of the minutes of the discussions of the parliament, and there was a petition sent from Izmir. So it was saying that in Izmir the salaries of the officers were not paid, and therefore military officers were trading the furniture that were left from the Greeks, and this is how they were trying to make their living, because their salaries were not made. But I think when we read Izmir Press carefully, we see that this is a very traumatic, a more painful process. And in the same petition, it was saying that the houses that should be given to the migrants that came with the population exchange, they were invaded by the local community. And you know that in 1924 discussions were made at the parliament, and this has resulted in creation of the Progress Party, and in a short period of time this party was closed down, and together with the rebellion of Sheikh Said, an emergency state was declared in the Turkish history, and this emergency state really lasted quite long. And Talat Bey, and I'm calling him the consciousness of Izmir, and what has been told us by Ümit Bey, plunder, confiscation, seizure, and plundering, pillage. So these activities were carried out, these actions were carried out, and these were an inseparable part of Turkification policies. But years later, yes, I said deja vu, so it's as if I have lived these moments before. So this is the feeling I have felt, and as famous Carl Jung, as if told by Jung, there are some permanent cultural codes in these lands. So they are always repeating themselves. For instance, after the population exchange, or it is repeated after Izmir is lost, and population exchange process is represents confiscation, seizure, and when we look at 1942 to 1943, this is repeated with the wealth tax, and on the 6th and 7th September, a different event has occurred, but still we see plunder and pillage there. And recently, Gülenist people created Fatih University, and I learned that these buildings were transferred to Istanbul University. I think it will never end. So this is a cycle which repeats itself. So it is something which is naturalized. And we are not surprised when we hear that the Fatih University buildings are transferred to another university. It is as if we always estimate that this would happen, so it doesn't surprise us. And also, in the last 2 days, we learned other things. And what we heard tells us something about the nature of people, human beings living in these lands. So, personally, the Börekçizade Rıfat Bey, the head of the religion administration back then, I didn't know that he gave a fatwa related to plunder and pillage, and therefore I would like to thank Talat Bey for giving us this information. But he was the first head of the religious administration, so he was selected by Atatürk. He was the head of the religious affairs, and we see that the green light he has given brought the evilness inside the people, because ordinarily the evilness is not revealed, because we think that it is a sin, because it's a tradition, because we think that it's a shame, because we are afraid of the law enforcement officers, so that the police can catch us. So this, we suppress this usual evil. But suddenly a fatwa is given, a green light is lit, and then suddenly all this usual, ordinary evil comes out. And I think September 1922 is a special period in the history of these lands. Hannah Arendt mentioned evil. So we see that evil came out in this period in September 1922. And also, it was discussed today and yesterday. Turkification policies. Do these Turkification policies create bourgeois? No, they don't. Plunder, pillage, confiscation, seizure. So these tactics do not create a bourgeois. And years ago, I think it was in 1992, when I was studying on the wealth tax, I interviewed Bedi Taranto. He's a Jew textile industrialist in Istanbul, and Taranto family paid a really huge sum of wealth tax, and Bedi Bey was still working in the textile industry. He was almost 80 years old, and I told him, Bedi Bey, yes, we understand. So wealth tax was cutting off the non-Muslim bourgeois and replacing it with local national Muslim businessmen, entrepreneurs. So they wanted to replace it with a local entrepreneur class. Do you think that they were successful? He said no, they were not. This was not successful. So he clearly said no, and I said, why? How can you be so sure? And so it was on the upper floor of a Han in Karaköy, and he said, come on, Ayhan Bey. And we went there, we went to the window and we looked down. Do you see the escape station there? I'm almost 8 years old. I'm not using a car anymore. I sold my car and I'm using a cab to commute to the commute here. But these taxi drivers all worked in Germany for 20-25 years. And when I was interviewing, there was no euro. They were using mark, and they each saved 150,000 marks, and they came to Turkey, and then they purchased cap plates, and so 150,000 mark is a very nice capital. You can start a textile company from scrap, but none of them would establish such a textile company, because they wouldn't know what to produce, which fabric to produce, and they wouldn't know from whom to buy and to whom to sell. So this means if you know this, then you're a bourgeois and then you're a merchant. But here, when we look at the state's mind, the mind of the state here in this country, okay, it is, they want quick results. So this was a bourgeois creating operation. However, it didn't work out. At least in these periods, it didn't happen.
Instead of that, the plundered properties were not used in the good way. More than 20 flower plants were left dysfunctioning for years. This is the shrinking. This is the way of being introverted that I'm trying to explain. And finally, let us be the devil's advocate. We have listened to many good presentations, but there were some shortcomings. I have noted down a couple of them. For instance, 15th May of 1990, the Greek troops come to the Gulf and they stay till the first week of the October. So this is a period more longer than 3 years. So Izmir's or Aydın provinces governance by the Greek administration was not presented, dwelt on much during this Congress. Greek is more improved and developed in relation to having open archives in relation to those periods. Those who can speak Greek can go and check those archives, and many good papers might come out of them. And maybe it is time for Turkish and Greek historians to act together. So maybe by using local archives here and using Greek archives in Greece, these 3 years could be written very well. Secondly, again between 1850 and 1950, when we look at the Republic period, some important events take place in Izmir Free Party. For instance, Fethi Bey takes a ferry from Istanbul, and at that ferry there is an American diplomat, and they come here and they organize a meeting participated by 100-200,000 people. A man wants to give his son as a sacrifice, and 1930 autumn, so 8 years following the salvation of Izmir, Fethi Okyar received the slogans Fethi Baba saves us, save us from Ankara, and this was the end of the Free Party. After 90 days it is closed down, and Mr. Okyar has a very delicate saying here. He says that even the love of this nation might be a problem, he says, due to that meeting, because he sees that this excessive love causes problems. I wish there were some people who thought about the dynamics of that political party after the closing down of Serbest, the Free Party. There's this Menemen incident. No serious study was made on that. Some articles might be existent on that, but no serious study was conducted on that. Those people, uprising people, for instance, come to the square and ask merchants leave their stores to get out, and all of them who are getting out are hanged. There is a Jewish store owner, for instance, and he is hanged. Again, in the there was nothing in relation to the second half of the 1940s. Aegean region created a democratic party, for instance. Adnan Menderes, nothing was said about these facts. These are the shortcomings that I have noted down. And finally, we more or less started to get to know about what happened and what did not happen in the past. Maybe we are coming a little bit from behind, but we have a very fast steps this conference proves this, but what is the way of remembering what happened? How do we remember 1922? How our friends from Greece remember 1922? Do they only remember the fire? What is the perception? How these perception matrices developed? Our way of remembering. What is the place of our way of remembering is when we consider the Turkish and Greek frameworks. And as I conclude, I would like to get an applause for our interpreters who has been working for 2 days with us. Thank you very much. They are dealing with a very difficult task. We are aware of that. This is all from my party. As I said, I will not be going through all the presentations one by one. Thank you very much for everything. Thank you very much for your participation.